Hello and welcome to part 2 of my October month in review. Now, in part 1, we looked at 3 opening disasters that struck me in the Isle of Man Grand Suisse. And in this video, I will be choosing moments that, middle game and end game moments that taught me a lot. Now, how was the overall month in review? Well, it didn't go very well, and it became a crash course in survival. I really wasn't expecting that. I was like, hello, I worked hard. Why is this happening? And but it was the European Team Championships that really did it in for me, because I really expected to do very well there. And after all, I had been training with some of the best players in the world, and to lose game after game with the black pieces, I have to say, in the most silly way possible, like blundering a piece, blundering material, blundering the game, and not good, not nice. I'm neither gonna confirm or deny, but somebody might have got some telephone calls saying, I am never ever going to play chess again. Now, how to kind of like fight that kind of instinct to kind of go, whoa, I'm done. I am out of here. And the way I kind of got over that was by overdosing on the preachiest, corniest, cheesiest videos that I could find that said, you can do this, you control everything. And did that work? Well, if you look at the results kind of say no, but there is one important thing. I won my last round game. So everything changes because of that. You can have the worst tournament in the world. You can play like lemon, and doesn't matter if you win the last round game, if you knuckle down, dig deep, and it's all okay at the end. And that's kind of really how I'm feeling. So I'm kind of looking back at these two events and I'm cool with it because I won my last round game. Now, I'd like to kick off this video with a look at the following position. Now, this is from my game against Pierre Kramlin, played at the European Team Championships. Now, a little bit of a backstory is that I had virtually lost all my games in the Isle of Man and the European Team Championships with the black pieces. I think I had a wonderful score of 1 point out of 9, 9 or 8. Yeah, it was a bit depressing. What can I say? Happens. Don't laugh too hard. Anyhow, I had this terrible score, and we reached the following position, and it's a very, very strategically tense position. Now, before we kind of continue, I would like to give you, the viewer at home, a chance to pause the screen and think about a plan or perhaps a move for black. And then I'll tell you what I played, and then I tell you how you should actually approach the position. So this is a big chance. Pause the screen. Okay? Last chance, and now begin. Now, I have to confess that I spent 30 minutes, between 30 and 40 minutes actually, thinking about this position, and I could not see the wood for the trees, and I ended up just getting absolutely lost in myriads and myriads of lines, and then lashing out and playing something terrible actually. What you should do is you should start to see the bigger picture. You need to frame your thinking into what needs to be done. And of course, you do this for both sides. And so we look at the white's strengths and white's disadvantages, and we do the same for black, because after all, 2 players are playing the game. Okay, so let's start with the white pieces. So white has a tremendous pawn center, and she has the ability to push this pawn. So the threat is to play e5 and either to cut the position in 2 with this wonderful pawn chain of d4, e5, and f6, or there is another threat, which is to go after an e5, knight to e2, and imprison my queen. Very dangerous. White also has good pieces a good rook on d1. The rook on f1 is a little bit shaky, but you know, the queen on c2 is well placed, and the knight has the potential to jump to a4 and then to c5, and we can see that white perhaps can start, given the right circumstance, a queenside attack. Now, that makes it appear like white has got an amazing position. Well, not exactly. And it is tense because I also have some trumps. And I am incredibly strong on the king side. I have a wonderful pawn on h4. My queen, it is in no danger, but it is very well placed on f4. Remember, it's on white side of the board. So it's always good to have a piece on your enemy side of the board. And I have the possibility of disrupting this pawn center with the pawn breaks g5. Hang on, let's get there. Oh, I'm not getting these arrows. g5 and c6, c5. So these are two possibilities that white must always be considering. And let's look, and it's black to play here. So let's have a look at black's candidate moves. Now, the first thing I need to think about is e4, e5, a threat. If it is a threat, we have to look at why it's so successful as a threat. And the next thing we have to think about, what would I like to play? And this is where you think about your strengths. And the move that I really would like to play is basically h3. I want to play h3, first of all, to secure some space. And in the event of the opening of the G line, I get that. Look at that highlighted square, that G2. If I can get a rook to G2, oh, it's going to be a good time, isn't it? Yeah. And in order to make h3 work, we have to assess e5. Now, the big question is after knight d7, does my queen get trapped? And this is actually resolved by clean calculation. No emotion here, please. You know, just brute force and calculation. So queen takes h2, rook h1, queen f2, and we do a little happy dance because the queen is out. No prison for her today. Instead, white can be a little bit more sophisticated, and we have to spot these ideas. White can play queen d3, and the big threat is actually to play queen e3. So we can also mentally solve this problem by asking, well, what piece is in our way? And we can see that the jailer is in fact the pawn on e5. So you can get rid of it in two ways. You can get rid of it with f6, or if you're a computer or you're especially talented, you might find the way of rook d g8, and after queen e3 you undermine this pawn center and undermine the defense of the said jailer, and the queen gets out and lives a very happy life. If I concluded that in fact e5 is a strong strategical threat, I have to ask myself, why is it a strong strategical threat? And if the answer is that, hey, it's because of e5 and f6, then one other move that I can play is knight e8. The idea being that after e5, I can go knight g7, and after f6, yes, this is very good. But remember that plan of undermining? Well, it's particularly dangerous because after knight e6, as you can see, I'm attacking on d4. I still have the idea of c5, but what is perhaps even more dangerous is g4. So for instance, you know, depending on where white puts the queen, if white plays queen d3, I can play g4. And the beauty of g4 is that after pawn takes pawn, I am taking the h2 pawn. That one is going. And yeah, queen g3 in the air, like after rook, say rook d2, queen g3. Not only is my queen not getting trapped, I have one hell of a pawn on h4. Yes, it's a fantastic game for me. Queen d3 doesn't need to be played. For instance, white can play queen f2, in which case maybe I will start looking at, because I can't win on h2, I can play c5 and disrupt the pawns there. Queen takes e5, and you can see white's position is starting to fall apart. So this is how I should have approached the position. Now, if I were to show you what happened after my half hour of pulling my hair out and playing just a random move, I ended up playing queen c7, which was, as we've seen, pointless. White plays e5. I haven't dealt with a strategical threat. And after knight h5, f6. And yeah, I have a strong square, and I put my knight on f4. But as we all know from my previous videos, you know, white is never going to be comfortable with allowing this knight to sit there on f4. And so white plays knight e2, and after knight e6, f4. And now here I just, you know, the only chance I have to save the game is to play g takes f4. And I lashed out. I didn't have any time. And I ended up playing c5. Again, the hand moved way faster than the brain. And of course, after f5, no one can cope with those 3 pawns. Now we're going to jump a little bit back in time to my 8th round game in the Isle of Man against Casper Pura. Now here I was playing white. I reached the following rook and pawn ending. Now the position is a little bit spicy because white has a passed pawn on a7 and black of course has a pawn on d4. There is one point though, that white can at any time play rook d8 and exchange this d4 pawn for the a7 pawn, and that will lead into rook and 4 versus rook and 3. Now this is like a conundrum. Is this winning for the attacker? Is it a draw? And the answer is there's serious winning chances for the attacking side. I did have one piece of knowledge, and that the ideal pawn structure for the defender is to have pawns on h4, g3 and f2. And the reason for this is that it's difficult for black to advance the pawns without making trades. Now trading pawns is a very important defensive maneuver. Now during the game, I noticed that I didn't have this perfect defensive structure with pawns on f3, g3, and I could put it on h4. And black has very flexible pawn structure with pawns on e7, f7, g6, and h7. Hasn't committed anything anywhere. So I wasn't really sure how this 4 versus 3 would work out. Is it a win? Is it a loss? I didn't know. I actually went to great lengths to avoid it and tried to seek more concrete play based on this pawn on a7. So when I got back home, I thought, well, you know what? The lesson here is that you, Jovi, need to learn about rook and 3 versus rook and 4. You need to know the techniques. And so I went to my library and I picked out my reference books, these chunky books, Dvoretsky and Fundamental Chess Endings, as well as these super old books by Spielman, Averbach and Smyslov. And the great news is that the Dvoretsky book, which I recommend this, it came out, this is the original, 2003. If Forward Chess had been around in 2003, I would have bought it on Forward Chess. However, this book is available on Forward Chess right now, and I recommend that every person get this book. You really need an endgame manual in your library. If you don't have it, how else are you gonna check your endgames against it? So I went and I accumulated all the knowledge that I can find. I also have 2 books on Forward Chess, specifically on rook and pawn endings, and going to check out what they have to say in a second. So here I am using Forward Chess on my desktop again, and this time I'm going to be quickly whizzing through a chapter in the book Mastering Typical Rook Endgames by Adrian Michalchyshin. And how I do this, and I can do this very quickly, I just simply go through the main examples, looking for positions that either I really have to commit to memory or are very similar to my game. So we can see on the first example that I have up on the screen that the attacker is already in a great position because the pawns have advanced up to the 4th rank, and black, the defender, didn't manage to get the promised h5. You need to get that pawn move, and in my case it would be h4. And let's whiz down and let's have a look at the second example, which is Capablanca Fine. Also a completely different pawn structure. The attacker has an isolated pawn, and it's a different type of structure. So let's get down, and then okay, this one on the other hand, I feel that I should commit this one to memory. Why should I commit this one especially? Because of the pawn structure, because I mentioned that f7, g6, h5 is like the perfect pawn structure in the world, you know, for the defender. And white has this beautiful pawn chain as well. So yeah, if this is the best that black is going to get, then I want to see how white attacks. I also want to see the correct defensive procedure. So let's play through a few moves, and king goes to h3, g7, all very normal. Rook a3, rook c7. Okay, and now black has to deal with the threat of e6, and there's no way you're going to retreat the king, because you simply allow the white king an extra square to penetrate. So with g5, and from g5 probably h6, and this is very, very bad news if you allow the white king to h6. So it's a question, do you go rook e3 or do you go rook a6? Now it looks like a question of apples and pears, isn't it? Both the same thing, and you know, normally I would go rook e3, it looks like the most active move. But we can see it's been awarded a question mark, so now this is a sign for me to pay attention. So rook a6, okay, rook e7, now still e6 is in the air, and obviously I don't want to step backwards unless I'm going to go king f8. Okay, so he's recommending rook b6. Now that's very interesting to me, because black is completely ignoring the threat of e6. Any point to that? And we can see that after e6, okay, king f6 is the big idea, and that this should be a relatively straightforward draw. And if white doesn't do e6, let's go back after rook b6, and let's see what happens after king g5. Okay, we wait in a different way. So again, we mind the pawn. When e6 is a threat, we take back action. And after f5, g takes f5. Yes, e6 looks incredibly dangerous to me. And what next? I'm guessing f4 check. And king takes f4. And still this old chestnut of king f6. And now it is nearly virtually a draw. We use this rook. Look how nicely the rook is placed on b5, protecting h5. So definitely an important one to commit to memory, to perhaps store in my rook and pawn database. Now, going back to my position, I can actually say that I did actually find a position in the books that was incredibly similar. And let's go back and see. So I should play h4. It's defensively the most desirable move on the board. And a quick note that after rook a2, king g1, king f1, doesn't quite matter. That e5 is not necessarily desirable because of rook e8, and the pawn on d4 isn't as strong as the passed pawn on the e line, which is connected to its sibling on f7. So bear that in mind. Let's play a random move like d3, and now rook d8, rook takes a7, rook takes d3, and this position is now absolutely similar to a game played by Vladimir Kramnik and Garry Kasparov in 2000 in their World Championship match, I think game 14. And there is some slight differences in that black had a pawn on e6 and a pawn on h5, which I'm going to try to artificially recreate for you so you can see the drawing technique. So after rook d7, following on from the Kramnik game, he played well, he didn't play, but I'm trying to recreate it, and I'll tell you when we get to the position after here. This was the game. Yeah, and so he played king f8, and Kramnik basically drew the game because he kept sticking to that weak pawn on f7. So if we quickly move up, you can see that the black king can't get further than the 6th rank because of that f7 pawn. And now it's kind of recommended that you should play f4, and you kind of kill the idea of any e5s and g5. But Kramnik didn't actually do that. Instead, Kramnik played king f1, and Garry played e5, rook b6, and then king f5, rook b7. A little dancing going on. And then eventually after f6, rook g7. And in fact, probably a nice move is to play rook b6 with the idea that after moves like g5, takes, takes, and then you can play rook b8. You really need to check from behind, maximum distance if you remember. And after moves like g4, we get rook f8 check. So if I had known my theory, I would have had no fear of going into this 4 versus 3. So it's the importance of knowing your endgames. Back to my game, well, I wasn't sure and I ended up playing f4. I really wanted to play this idea of g4, g5, and also I kind of wanted to get my king into f3 and to e4. Of course, my grandmaster opponent does not allow my king to get to f3. And then I hit upon this idea of g4. So the idea being that I should play g5 and can cage this king on g7. Now, my opponent here went wrong. He went king f6. He went h6, which allows me to execute my idea. I don't quite remember. I have no idea why I didn't play g5. I know I hesitated for a long time. I think I even had my hand over that pawn, but I ended up not playing it. Oh well. Talk yourself out of a good deal, huh? That's sometimes the way it goes. And instead I played h3, but after king f6, king e2, you can see the way that black untangles himself. And after king e7, I played h4. I should just play king e2. Remember, pawn structure is everything in rook and pawn endings. I know this, but I still went wrong. So it just goes to show. King after h4, of course, he heads back to f6, and I cannot go g5 check because of king f5, and suddenly the king starts harmonizing with its rook. And okay, too little, too late, as usual. And after rook takes to h5, what to do? What to do? The king is going to come in very, very nicely. Now, I should, of course, just go g takes h5, but I played rook b4 thinking I was very clever, because after h takes g, I could play king g3, and I thought, well, I still have some chances, but of course he plays rook a2, and that is it. Game over. So one big missed opportunity. And we're going to finish off by looking at my 8th round game in the European Team Championships against Dana Reizniece from Latvia. And I was playing white, and up until this point, I had played, okay, this sounds really immodest, but I played a great game. I had found a lot of resources, and as a consequence, I was chuffed to bits. And I really thought that after my move, queen f3, and I played this very quickly, that my opponent was going to stretch out her hand, resign, and say to me, well played. Great game. I was already doing my little mental jig. No, bad. Bad. Instead, my opponent just played queen e7, and she played in a very kind of resigned way, you know, that she knew the end was going to come. So I played very quickly queen e3, and we get ourselves into this king and pawn ending. And if I fast forward up to king f5, it was at this point when I started thinking, why, Jovi, why did you go into a king and pawn ending? Okay, situation 1. You're not on form when it comes to calculation. You're making basic errors. King and pawn endings, they're renowned for calculation. And secondly, let's go back to this position with the queen on e4. Let's compare. How easy is this? I mean, I don't have to worry about perpetuals because my king is completely safe. Her king on h6, not so safe. The pawn on c5, weak. You know, mate is coming, and there's really not so much she can do here. And so I must confess, I spent a whole lot of this king and pawn ending going, why do you do this to yourself? Why not live the easy life? You could have just finished the game so quickly, and now you're having to sit down and work it out. Yeah, lesson number 2. do what needs to be done. You know, you've made your mistake. What's the point of beating yourself up about it? You know, there's really no point. And so it comes to this king and pawn ending, and actually it really is incredibly instructive. You know, it's quite frustrating to look at it and just go, I can't believe I didn't think about the right technique. But I mean, again, I wasn't considering certain things. I wasn't necessarily objective. And one of the things to help you with when it comes to calculating in king and pawn endings is this concept of critical squares. Now, I'm going to highlight the most critical squares in red. So if I get my king to d5, I will win. If I get my king to e5, I will win. If I'm allowed to get my king to f5, I will win. And the last one, if I'm allowed to get to g5, I will win. So in terms of which ones are the entry points, we have d5 and g5. All of them are important. Then we have access points, e4, f4 and g4. So what I need to do now is I need to have as many routes into the black position as possible. I need to make black stretch. Well, if black simply has to guard the d5 point, then the position is most likely a draw, because my extra pawn on b3 and e3 are not the best pawns. So this is the way I should have been thinking. And if you think in terms of critical squares and access points, the answer becomes very obvious. And it's h4 basically, because I keep all of my roads open. And the game could continue king e5, e4. You know, I'm not going to play g4 because that closes off one of the access points. And most likely the best kind of defense is to go h6, and after king e3, g5. But then the situation is very clear, because after h takes g5, h takes king f3, and there you go, I'm into g4. And actually now new critical square has emerged, and that is the square on h5. In fact, the win is very, very trivial after king g4, king f6, king h5. So very, very simple, but only if you frame your thinking in this way. And that concludes my look at my chess in October. So as they say, you get on with it, you get over it. And you know, I've hopefully these mistakes have come to you with a smile, because you know, chess is quite an awesome game, isn't it really? So what is next? Well, I have a very, very exciting tournament on the horizon. I am going to be playing. I do feel it kind of deserves a bit of a drum roll, like I will be playing for the rest of the world against Poland. So this is a blitz event, it's a rapid event, and a Fischer random as well as classical. And we will be taking on 6 Polish players. Yeah, I cannot wait. It will be such a big challenge. And I'd also like to thank you all for putting up with my croaky voice. I did try to fix it in the most British way possible by drinking lots of tea. Look, I'm getting ready for Christmas. Oh, I said the C word. Anyhow, until the next.